Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the star of our show, Terry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Music and Me. I'm your host, Terry, and I am so excited that you're here because we're finally going to be talking about one of Broadway's most beautiful, emotional, and unforgettable musicals, Ragtime. I've mentioned it several times in my previous episodes. I do have to admit that before this year's Tony Awards, I knew Ragtime had a huge reputation, and I was familiar with most of its songs because I'd listened to the cast recording. But I didn't really know the full story. Then, this incredible revival started getting so much attention, racking up Tony nominations, and I found myself thinking, okay, I really need to learn more about this musical. And that's one of my favorite things about doing this podcast, as I've mentioned several times. It gives me the perfect excuse to discover shows I might not have explored otherwise. And hopefully, we get to learn something together. Even if you've never seen Ragtime, there's a pretty good chance you've heard songs like Wheels of a Dream or the incredibly inspiring Make Them Hear You. Those songs have taken on lives of their own in the Broadway world. And for good reason. They're absolutely stunning. But what makes Ragtime so special isn't just the music, it's the story. This musical takes us back to the early 1900s and explores some incredibly important themes that are honestly just as meaningful today as they ever were a century ago. It tells stories about racism, immigration, family, hope, love, and what it really means to chase the American dream. And even though it's set in the past, so many of its messages still feel incredibly relevant. It's one of those rare musicals that can make you smile one moment, completely break your heart the next, and then leave you feeling hopeful by the time the curtain comes down. That's a pretty amazing accomplishment. So today, we're going to take a journey through the story of Ragtime. We'll talk about where it came from, meet the unforgettable characters, explore some of its incredible music, and of course, we'll spend some time celebrating its huge success at this year's Tony Awards. There is definitely a reason this revival has captured the hearts of audiences all over again. So grab your playbill, settle into your favorite seat, and let's head back to the turn of the century as we explore the incredible world of Ragtime. So, what exactly is Ragtime? If you're anything like me, you may have heard people talk about it for years and thought, I know it's supposed to be amazing, but what's it actually about? Well, we're going to fix that in this episode. Ragtime began as a novel by E.L. Doctorow before it was transformed into a Broadway musical in 1998. The show features music by Stephen Flattery, lyrics by Lynn Ahrens, and a book by the legendary Terrence McNally. Together, they created something that many theater fans consider one of the greatest musicals ever written. The story takes place in America at the dawn of the 20th century, a time when the country was changing in some pretty dramatic ways. New inventions were appearing, cities were growing, and millions of people were arriving in America hoping for a better life. But while there was a lot of opportunity, there was also a great deal of inequality and prejudice. One of the things that makes Ragtime so unique is that it doesn't just follow one main character. Instead, it tells the stories of three very different groups of people whose lives gradually become connected. First, there's a wealthy white family living in New Rochelle, New York. They're comfortable, successful, and represent what many people might have thought was the ideal American family of the time. But as the story unfolds, they begin to see that the world around them is changing, and they have to decide how they'll change with it. Then we meet Tatya and his young daughter. They've come to America as Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, hoping to escape poverty and build a better future. Their journey is filled with challenges, but it's also one of the most inspiring parts of the musical because it reminds us just how much courage it takes to start over in a brand new country. And finally, we meet Cole House Walker Jr., an incredibly talented pianist, and Sarah, the woman he loves. Coalhouse is successful, confident, and believes that if he works hard and does everything right, he'll be treated fairly. Unfortunately, he quickly discovers that racism and injustice stand in the way of that dream, and his story becomes one of the most emotional centerpieces of the entire musical. As these three stories unfold, they begin to intertwine in ways that are sometimes uplifting, sometimes heartbreaking, and always compelling. That's what really makes Ragtime so special. It isn't just telling one family story, it's telling America's story through the eyes of people from very different backgrounds. And what struck me most while learning about this musical is that even though it's set more than 100 years ago, so many of the questions it asks still feel relevant today. What does it really mean to have equal opportunity? Can the American dream truly be available to everyone? How do people from different backgrounds find common ground? Those are the big questions, and Ragtime doesn't shy away from asking them. I think that's one of the reasons this show has continued to resonate with audiences for nearly 3 decades. It's not just a history lesson, it's a deeply human story about hope, perseverance, love, and the belief that tomorrow can be better than today. Now that we've talked about the story, let's get to what I always love talking about the most, the music. And wow, this score is absolutely gorgeous. Even before I started researching this episode, I had heard people say that Ragtime has one of the greatest scores ever written for Broadway. And after spending a lot of time listening to it, I completely understand why people feel that way. The music was written by Stephen Flattery with lyrics by Lynn Ahrens, and together they created something that's emotional, powerful, and just unforgettable. Every song feels like it's moving the story forward while also giving us a glimpse into what each character is feeling. The show opens with the song Ragtime, and what an opening. Right from the very first notes, you're introduced to all three families and their very different lives. It does an incredible job of setting the stage for everything that's about to happen. It feels grand, exciting, and full of possibility, while also hinting that life isn't going to be easy for everyone we meet. One of the first songs that really grabbed my attention was Journey On. It's a beautiful reminder that no matter how difficult life gets, we have to keep moving forward. It's hopeful without feeling overly sentimental, and I can see why it's become such a fan favorite. Then there's Your Daddy's Son, which I mentioned in my Father's Day episode. I don't even know if I have the words to describe this one. It's heartbreaking. Sarah sings with so much pain and emotion that you can't help but feel every word. It's one of those songs that just stops you in your tracks. And of course, we have to talk about Wheels of a Dream. This might be the one song that many people know, even if they've never seen the musical. Coalhouse Walker Jr. and Sarah dream about a future where their son can grow up in a world that's kinder and more equal than the one they're living in. It's hopeful, it's beautiful, and it's incredibly moving because it's such a universal wish. Every parent wants a better future for their child. Another standout is Back to Before. This is Mother's big moment in the show, and it's all about realizing that once you've grown and changed, you can't simply go back to the way things used to be. It's such a powerful anthem about finding your own voice and embracing change. And I have a feeling this is one of those songs that really resonates with audiences because we've all had moments in life where we realize we're not the same person we used to be. Then we come to Till We Reach That Day. This number is emotional, passionate, and filled with both grief and determination. It captures the pain of injustice while also reminding us that hope can survive even in the darkest moments. And finally, there's Make Them Hear You. I don't think you can talk about Ragtime without mentioning this incredible song. It's become one of Broadway's most iconic anthems. The message is simple but powerful. Speak up, stand for what you believe in, and make your voice count. It's inspiring, emotional, and one of those songs that gives you goosebumps every time you hear it. One thing I really appreciate about this score is how many different musical styles it incorporates. You hear traditional Broadway sounds, ragtime rhythms, gospel influences, marches, and soaring ballads all woven together in one cohesive musical. It reflects the melting pot of America itself, with different voices and musical traditions coming together to create something truly special. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons ragtime has stood the test of time. These aren't just beautiful songs, they tell a story. They make you care about the characters, they make you think, and sometimes they make you cry. And isn't that what the best musicals are supposed to do? Even though I'm still getting to know this musical, I completely understand why so many theater fans rank Ragtime among Broadway's all time greatest scores. After listening to it, I have a feeling those songs are going to stay with me for a very long time. One of the things that surprised me most while learning about Ragtime is just how relevant it still feels. Sometimes we think of historical musicals as stories that are locked away in the past, but Ragtime doesn't feel that way at all. Yes, it's set in the early 1900s, but the themes it explores are still conversations we're having today. That's part of what makes this musical so timeless. Let's start with racism. Colehouse Walker Jr.'s story is incredibly powerful, and honestly, it's heartbreaking. Here's a man who has worked hard, built a successful career, and simply wants to live his life with dignity. He believes that if he does everything right, he'll be treated fairly. Instead, he's met with hatred and injustice simply because of the color of his skin. As I learned more about this story, I couldn't help but think about how frustrating and painful that must have been, not just for Colehouse, but for so many people throughout history. His journey reminds us that equality has never been something we can take for granted. It's something people have to fight for, and in many ways, that work continues today. Then there's the theme of immigration through Tatia and his daughter. I found myself really connecting with their story because it's all about hope. Imagine leaving everything you've ever known, traveling to a completely different country, not knowing what your future will look like, and simply believing that life can be better. That takes an incredible amount of courage. Their journey reminded me that America has always been shaped by people chasing dreams and searching for opportunity. Of course, that journey isn't easy, and Ragtime doesn't pretend that it is. But it beautifully captures the determination it takes to build a new life. Another character who really grows throughout the musical is Mother. At the beginning of the show, she's living the life that's expected of her. But as the story unfolds, she begins to discover her own independence, confidence, and strength. Watching her find her voice is one of the most inspiring parts of the musical. I think that's something a lot of us can relate to. Life changes us. We grow, we learn, and sometimes we realize we're capable of much more than we ever imagined. Look at me, I'm doing a podcast. Who would have ever thought my shy self would be doing a podcast? So there you go. Every major character in Ragtime is chasing some version of that dream. For some, it's safety. For others, it's success. For others, it's simply the hope of being treated with dignity and respect. But the musical also asks an important question. Is that dream equally available to everyone? That's a question that doesn't have an easy answer. And I think that's one of the reasons Ragtime continues to resonate with audiences nearly 30 years after it premiered. It challenges us to think about where we've come from, how far we've come, and how much work is still left to do. What I appreciate most is that Ragtime never loses hope. Yes, there are heartbreaking moments. There are moments that will probably make you cry. But underneath it all is this belief that people can change, that society can grow, and that every generation has the opportunity to make the world a little better than the one they inherited. To me, that's one of the most beautiful messages any musical can share. And maybe that's why Ragtime continues to find new audiences. It isn't just telling us about history, it encourages us to learn from it. It reminds us that compassion matters, courage matters, and every person's story has value. That's a message I think is just as important today as it was when Ragtime first opened on Broadway. And judging by what happened at this year's Tony Awards, I'm definitely not the only one who feels this musical still has something important to say. So let's talk about the incredible comeback Ragtime made on Broadway this year. When the Tony nominations were announced, Ragtime quickly became one of the biggest stories of the season. The revival earned an incredible 11 Tony Award nominations, which is no small feat. That alone showed us just how much this production has resonated with audiences and critics alike. I talked a little bit about this revival in my Tony Awards episode, and I remember saying that Ragtime was the show I was most excited to learn more about. I already loved the music, but I didn't know much about the story. But after researching this episode, I can finally say I understand why so many people love this musical. Then came Broadway's biggest night. Not only did Ragtime live up to all the excitement, it walked away as the winner for Best Revival of a Musical. And I have to say, I was pretty happy to see that. This is one of those shows that feels timeless, and it's wonderful to see a whole new generation discovering it. But that wasn't the only award it took home. Joshua Henry won the Tony Award for Best Leading Actor in a Musical for his unforgettable performance as Coalhouse Walker Jr. And from everything I've seen and heard, his performance was absolutely phenomenal. Coalhouse is already one of the most complex and emotionally demanding roles in musical theater, and it sounds like Joshua Henry poured everything he had into bringing that character to life. Casey Levy also won the Tony Award for Best Leading Actress in a Musical for her portrayal of Mother. Mother goes through such an incredible transformation over the course of the show, and it takes a truly gifted performer to capture every step of that journey. And it sounds like Casey Levy did exactly that. I was so excited when Casey Levy won because I've loved her since the musical Frozen. She's one of my favorite Broadway performers of all time, as well as Joshua Henry. So I was really excited that both of them took home Tonys. The revival also won Best Sound Design of a Musical, which honestly didn't surprise me at all. When you have a score as rich and powerful as Ragtime, every musical detail matters. Great sound design helps bring those beautiful orchestrations and emotional moments to life, allowing the audience to fully experience every note. One thing that I really love about Broadway revivals is that they give incredible shows a second or sometimes third or fourth chance to find new audiences. There are so many people, myself included, who weren't able to see the original production back in 1998. Revivals let us experience these classics in fresh and exciting ways while introducing them to people who may have never heard of them before. Judging by all the recognition Ragtime received this season, I'd say this revival accomplished exactly that. It's proof that a truly great musical never goes out of style. The costumes may represent another era, the setting may be over a century ago, but the themes, the characters, and especially the music continue to speak to audiences today. That's the mark of something truly special. Seeing Ragtime celebrated in such a big way at this year's Tony Awards makes me hopeful that even more people will discover this incredible musical. And honestly, I think that's something worth celebrating. As I wrap up today's episode, I have to say that learning more about Ragtime has given me a whole new appreciation for this musical. Getting into this, I already knew the songs from the cast recording. I'd heard Wheels of a Dream several times. I'd heard Make Them Hear You, and I knew people spoke very highly of the score. But I didn't really understand why this musical meant so much to theater fans. And now I do, and hopefully you all do too. What surprised me the most is just how ambitious this show is. It's telling the stories of so many different people from different backgrounds. Yet somehow, it all comes together in one incredibly moving story about hope, change, and what it means to build a better future. I also love that Ragtime doesn't give us easy answers. It celebrates hope while also being honest about the struggles people face. It reminds us that history isn't always comfortable, but it's important to understand if we want to keep moving forward. And then there's the music. I love this music so much. I absolutely understand why so many Broadway fans consider this one of the greatest scores ever written. Every song serves a purpose, every lyric helps tell the story, and there are moments that are so emotional they'll stay with you long after the curtain comes down. I also have to say that after doing all this research, I would absolutely love to see this revival in person. From everything I've read and the performances I've watched, it looks like an incredible production. And now I completely understand why it was such a big winner at this year's Tony Awards. One of my favorite things about doing this podcast is that it encourages me to step outside of my comfort zone and discover music and musicals I may not have explored otherwise. Every once in a while, I come across something that completely surprises me, and Ragtime is definitely one of those shows. If you've never listened to the cast recording, I hope today's episode encourages you to do that. And if you've never seen Ragtime, I hope you'll add it to your Broadway bucket list because I certainly have. Whether it's the soaring music, the unforgettable characters, or the powerful message, I think there's something in this musical that speaks to everyone. And I honestly think that's why Ragtime has continued to touch audiences for nearly 30 years. It's more than just a Broadway musical, it's a story about humanity, it's a story about hope, and it's a reminder that even when the world is changing around us, compassion, courage, and the dream of a better tomorrow will never go out of style. Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of today's journey through Ragtime. I have to say, this episode reminded me why I love doing this podcast so much. Sometimes I get to revisit old favorites, and other times, like today, I get to dive into a musical I thought I knew, only to discover there was so much more beneath the surface. I started this episode knowing all the songs because I've listened to the cast recording so many times, but I'm ending it with a whole new appreciation for the story, the characters, and the incredible talent behind this masterpiece. And I think that's a pretty great trade. If you've never listened to Ragtime, I hope you'll give the cast recording a chance. It is amazing. If you've only heard Wheels of a Dream or Make Them Hear You, trust me, there is so much more waiting to be discovered. And if you ever get the opportunity to see this musical on stage, do not pass it up. If you want to see the production now, you'll have to hurry though, because it closes on August 17th. And tickets are pretty high. I looked them up the other day just to see how much they were, and it said tickets start at $209 or something like that. That's a little high for my budget, but I would do it because this musical is worth it. And I'm guessing the price is only that high because they won the Tony. But maybe it was that high to begin with. I don't know. But it's definitely moved way up on my Broadway wish list. Now, I did find a recorded version on YouTube, which I watched the other day. So I have now seen Ragtime. And I would definitely pay good money to see it live because it was amazing. If you want to watch it on YouTube, you'll have to look up Ragtime Slime Tutorial. But it's worth it if you want to check it out. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me here on The Music and Me. Whether you've been listening since the beginning or this is your very first episode, I am so grateful that you're here. And if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Because I've got plenty more Broadway, movie soundtracks, pop music, country music, and all kinds of musical adventures coming your way. Until next time, keep discovering new music, keep supporting the arts, keep singing along, even if it's only in the car or in the shower, because let's be honest, those are some of our best performances. And most importantly, keep finding the music in your life. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, everyone. This has been the Music in Me podcast. Subscribe now so you don't miss a beat.